Adolf Hitler's Operation Barbarossa, approved in December 1940, was based on the principle of blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Its strategic goal was to defeat the Red Army west of the Dnieper-West Dwina line, prevent the retreat of combat-ready units into the interior of the country, and subsequently reach the Arkhangelsk-Astrakhan line by autumn 1941. The main milestones of this plan were Moscow, as the political and transport center of the USSR, and Leningrad, considered the cradle of the revolution, the nest of Bolshevism, and the largest industrial and cultural center in the country. Capturing these cities, according to the German command, would lead to the complete moral and political collapse of the Soviet state and its capitulation to the Third Reich. However, it was not simply about capturing the two capitals of Russia to achieve the geopolitical superiority of the Axis powers. Hitler wrote in his diary, "Moscow and Leningrad must be razed to the ground to completely eliminate the population of these cities, which we, Germany, would be forced to feed throughout the winter. The task of destroying these cities must be carried out by aircraft. Tanks are not to be used for this purpose." In winter 1941, Operation Barbarossa had suffered a catastrophic failure. The collapse of the lightning ambitions of the German command, based on their experience of victories in Europe, resulted from the incredible courage, resilience, and selflessness of the defenders of Moscow and Leningrad. Their resistance, contrary to all military forecasts, exhausted and decimated the most powerful army in the world, halting the German offensive and setting the stage for a radical turning point in the war. The Battle of Moscow and the Siege of Leningrad began simultaneously in September 1941. For both approaches, the Nazis emphasized surprise, the power of the initial attacks, and instability in the occupied territories as key factors for success. To capture the capital of the USSR, the German command devised Operation Typhoon, which began on September 30 and was intended to end the war before winter. The first Soviet line of defense was broken through on October 5th. By the end of the month, the Red Army had managed to stop the enemy. In late November, the enemy crossed the Moscow-Volga Canal, but was unable to achieve any further offensive advances.
И неожиданно для врага Москва, сама Москва пошла в контрнаступление.
On December 5th and 6th, 1941, a counteroffensive began near Moscow, pushing the enemy back 100 to 250 kilometers west of the capital. This was the Wehrmacht's first major defeat in World War II. The psychological impact was stunning for Germany, the USSR, and all humanity. The myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility had been irretrievably destroyed. The lightning war had failed and a prolonged war of attrition began, one which Germany, having attacked the Soviet Union, was not prepared to fight. In total, the Battle of Moscow lasted approximately 7 months. More than 3 million men, about 3,000 tanks, over 2,000 aircraft, and more than 22,000 artillery pieces and mortars were involved on both sides. By late April 1942, the Wehrmacht's losses were 5 times greater than Nazi losses in Europe, Poland, and the Balkans. The invaders did not expect that Soviet units would continue to fight fiercely and relentlessly slow the enemy's advance even when surrounded or besieged. This is exactly what happened in the Vyazma and Bryansk pockets in autumn 1941, when the Typhoon offensive was halted for 1 or 2 weeks that proved crucial for the entire country, albeit with colossal and irreparable losses. We cannot forget the heroism of the Pamphilovites, soldiers of the 316th Rifle Division, 8th Guards, which was formed in July 1941. From among recruits and volunteers of the Soviet republics of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, under the command of political instructor Vasily Klotchkov. Official reports indicate that 28 Red Army soldiers from the 316th Division repelled an attack of 50 German tanks on November 16, destroying 18 of them in 4 hours. All these heroes perished, but they managed to halt the advance of the enemy column. One of the reports from Colonel General Hopner to Commander von Bock stated that this wild division fights violating all rules, refuses to surrender, and does not fear death. Klotchkov himself uttered the now iconic phrase before the battle: "Russia is vast, but there is nowhere to retreat. Moscow is behind us." At a critical moment at the Battle of Moscow, when enemy troops were approaching the capital, the story of the heroic act of the Panfilov instantly turned into a powerful symbol of popular resistance and became an effective mobilization tool, vividly demonstrating to the entire Soviet people their readiness to fight to the last breath for the homeland and instilling confidence in victory both in the active army and in the rear. After the war, it was revealed that this story was only partially true and partially literary fiction, transforming eyewitness accounts into a military myth. For example, it was found that only 5 of the 28 heroes survived, and that the battle at the Dubosekova Junction was only one episode of a larger battle between the 2nd Battalion of the 1075th Regiment of the 316th Rifle Division, commanded by Major General Ivan Panfilov, and a column of German tanks. This does not diminish the feat of the heroes who stood firm to the end and gave their own lives to stop the enemy. Although it may only be a legend, it still resonates with people. In 2016, the decision was made to produce a feature film telling the story of the heroic deeds of the 28 Panfilov soldiers. Initially, crowdfunding was used, but the Russian Ministry of Culture later also joined the project. Funds for the film 28 Panfilov Soldiers were raised all over the world. More than 35,000 people donated almost 31 million rubles. The film was seen by approximately 3.5 million people in Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS. The Soviet victory near Moscow thwarted the Blitzkrieg plan against the USSR, raised the morale of the Soviet people, and forced Japan and Turkey to abandon the idea of entering the war against the Soviet Union. Japan's refusal allowed several divisions to be redeployed from the Far East to Moscow. The myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility had been destroyed. The Red Army proved its ability not only to defend, but also to attack successfully, which significantly strengthened the anti-Hitler coalition, intensified anti-fascist resistance in the occupied countries, and began to weaken Germany's alliance with its partners. On January 1st, 1942, the Declaration of the United Nations was signed by 26 states, which committed to using all military and economic resources in the war against the Nazi bloc. The most influential among them were the Big Three: the USSR, the USA, and the United Kingdom. In 1942, the documentary The Defeat of the Nazi Troops Near Moscow, directed by Leonid Varlamov and Ilya Kapalin, was released in the USSR. The film was shown not only in the USSR, where 800 copies were produced, but also in 28 other countries of the anti-Hitler coalition, including the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. For the release in the USA, the film was renamed Moscow Strikes Back. On September 21st, 1942, Life magazine called the film the first record of Russian courage. In the United States and the United Kingdom alone, more than 16 million viewers watched the film in 1,500 cinemas. The film received the Stalin Prize in the USSR and 2 special awards from the National Board of Review and the New York Film Critics Circle as the best documentary about the war in 1942. In 1943, The Defeat of the Nazi Troops Near Moscow became the first film to receive an Oscar for Best Documentary. The statuette bears the inscription for the heroism of Russian people in the defense of Moscow and for their work on the film under conditions of extreme danger. The golden plaster statuette was brought to the USSR by filmmaker Vladislav Mikosha. Currently, it is on display at the Central Cinema Museum in Moscow. We already mentioned that the Siege of Leningrad also began in September 1941, but the defensive work had been underway since the first days of the war. Thousands of Leningrad residents, armed with pickaxes, crowbars, and shovels, went outside the city daily, building pillboxes, bunkers, and other defensive structures, digging trenches and anti-tank ditches. The residents of Leningrad demonstrated true labor heroism in this work. The trenchmen, as they were called at the time, were exposed to mortal danger daily. Enemy aircraft dropped bombs on them and shelled them. The city was besieged as a result of the massive German and Finnish offensive. Mass evacuation of the population and replenishment of food supplies proved impossible. With the city surrounded and the summer food stocks depleted, famine spread. The food crisis worsened after the bombing of the Badaev warehouses on September 8, 1941, which destroyed 3,000 tons of flour and 700 tons of sugar. For many months, the Road of Life, which crossed Lake Ladoga, became the city's only link with the rest of the country. The Road of Life operated from September 1941 until March 1943. It performed several crucial functions for the city, supplying food and fuel to ensure the survival of the population, evacuating civilians, especially children and the sick, transporting military units and equipment, and moving industrial equipment. The waterway was the main means of communication before the lake froze. Deliveries were made by barges to a precarious section of the coast controlled by Soviet troops. The ice route was inaugurated on November 22, 1941. Work on the Road of Life took place under extremely difficult conditions, under constant bombing and attacks, in adverse weather conditions, and with a constant threat of the ice collapsing. During its operation, the Road of Life transported more than 1.6 million tons of cargo and evacuated approximately 1.4 million people. While the extremely dangerous Road of Life existed in the north of the USSR, in the south, aid convoys were organized and began operating in November 1942, thanks to the assistance of the Indian Army. India entered World War II as a British colony in 1939. The total length of the road, built by Indian engineering and construction units, was more than 1,100 kilometers. The Royal Indian Army Service Corps made 428 trips through these mountain passes and deserts, delivering approximately 62,000 tons of supplies to the Trans-Caucasian Front during the most difficult months of the fighting in the Caucasus. 2 Indian soldiers were awarded the Order of the Red Star. Famine continued to rage in Leningrad. People were forced to seek any means of sustenance. They gathered and ate flowers, which they used to make flatbreads, cooked with wood glue and bay leaves, and roasted bread with drying oil. Starvation was the main cause of death among the city's residents and accounted for 97% of all siege victims. People died on the streets, some in their sleep. However, the unshakable bastion of the banks of the Neva prevented the Wehrmacht from shifting forces that it desperately needed for a decisive attack on Moscow. In fact, the entire German Army Group North was withdrawn from the strategic offensive and came under siege. The steadfastness and resilience of the people of Leningrad prevented the Wehrmacht from securing control of the Baltic Sea and destroying one of the most powerful defense complexes of the Soviet Union, responsible for 30% of its military production. Control of the Baltic Sea not only meant having the necessary conditions for outflanking Moscow from the north, but also the secure supply of iron ore from Sweden, as well as nickel and other metals from Finland to the Nazi invaders. Despite the horrific conditions of the siege, famine, cold, artillery bombardment, the city did not surrender. Large industrial enterprises operated within the city. The Kirov plant produced shells and repaired tanks. The Abukov plant produced shells, gun parts, and mines. The Arsenal plant produced artillery systems and took part in the development of the Katyusha rocket launcher. The Admiralty shipyards built submarines, boats, and anti-submarine ships called Sea Hunters, designed to combat enemy submarines. The fortitude of the people of Leningrad became a symbol of resilience of the entire Soviet people. The writer Olga Bergots wrote in her diary on October 5, 1941, "We lived on trembling earth, under a howling sky. Our hearing functioned without control, catching every sound. Was it a siren? The whistle of a bomb or a shell? A German plane? Ours or German? Aimed at me or not?" When the all-clear signal sounded, everyone repeated it silently, humming and thinking, "This will never happen again." We learned to understand the meaning of home, a dwelling, a human abode, which was ready to protect us at any moment. The price paid by the defenders and residents of the city was horrifying. 800,000 residents of Leningrad died from hunger and deprivation. The siege lasted 872 days. The daily bread ration was 125 to 250 grams per person. Irina Zelenskaya, a siege survivor, wrote on May 21, 1942, "People with baskets and bags walk and crawl over every patch of green ground, tearing up nettles and that have barely sprouted 2 leaves and other grasses, and digging up dandelion roots. Every grassy area is devastated as if by swarms of moles." This heroic resistance gave rise to one of Dmitri Shostakovich's most famous symphonies, Symphony No. 7, the Leningrad Symphony. Completed in December 1941, the work premiered on March 5, 1942, in Kuybyshev and was performed by the Bolshoi Theater Orchestra. On August 9, 1942, the symphony was performed in besieged Leningrad. In every sense, it became a symbol of life and victory. Its movements depict Germany's treacherous attack on the USSR, the calm and mobilization of forces before the defeat of the enemy, a requiem for the fallen, and a grim prediction of the inevitable collapse of fascism with victory over the forces of Nazi Germany. The fortress of the Neva continued its struggle for survival. Works by Leningrad artists depicting the daily life of the besieged city were sent to the exhibition Works of Leningrad Artists during the Great Patriotic War, which opened in the capital on October 4, 1942. A letter from Smirnova, an employee of the Pushkin Museum, reads, "Moscow, November 13, 1942. I very much regret that you did not see the exhibition of Leningrad artists. They worked in inhumane conditions and created an image of a wonderful city amidst its sorrow and destruction. Unfortunately, the number of Leningrad artists has drastically decreased. In 1942, the works presented at the exhibition were acquired by the Russian State Museum as a historical and artistic document of the defense of Leningrad. One of the authors of this siege chronicle was the Leningrad artist Pakhomov, creator of this series of lithographs, Leningrad During the Siege. The series includes more than 30 graphic works depicting the daily life of the besieged city through scenes of snow removal, water collection, building restoration, and other daily activities of besieged Leningrad. With deep emotional intensity, the artist conveyed the bitterness of loss, fatigue, and anxiety of the residents, but also showed their strength and moments of hope. The undefeated defenders of Moscow and Leningrad, through their actions and bloodshed, thwarted the strategic plans of the Third Reich, both for Operation Barbarossa and for the entire Nazi domination of Eastern Europe. Their resistance proved decisive in the long and bloody march to Berlin and the long-awaited victory.